This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. Global Vice President for promoting the Patreon of the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good evening, Luke and Tennant. Lovely evening to be with you both from Gadigal country. My entrepreneurial endeavours know no bounds, as I'll have it be known that Tennant and I are not afraid to take over sparkling gala dinners for large conferences of people, as we had occasion to do a couple of weeks ago. Let's not, make too much of a big deal that it was Luke's conference, but we were invited, and I did take a small opportunity to interrupt proceedings and promote the pod. So shameless.
And are you suggesting that the Let Me Sum Up podcast is available for other events, conferences, weddings?
Well, I could be. Hell yes. I hadn't even thought of that before now. But yes, LMSU available for all major milestone celebrations. Oh, dear. Yes, but it was great. We had a couple hundred potential LMSU virgins in the audience. I don't know what they came away thinking afterwards.
Virgins is the word that...
First sheep, now virgins. This is getting problematic, Frankie.
I think it's accurate. Oh, God. I just saw Tennant disappear into his blanket.
Not a metaphor, dear listeners.
The little sidebar for new listeners. Tennant is not wandering around the podcast Linus style with a blanket that he's clutching and hiding under occasionally. He has a little blanket tent that he records the podcast under, which was, I think, last referenced on episode 7 with Catherine Murphy, because you both had blanket tents, and we thought that was quite amusing.
That's right.
But the blankets never went away. The blankets were the friends we made all along.
Frankie, do you have anything to tell our audience?
Oh, okay. Sorry. If you are not yet subscribed to our fabulous Patreon, you should head over there. There's all kinds of crazy memes going on and bonus episodes, including our recent sum up of the 24-25 federal budget. And excitingly, if you're not up for memes and alternative titles and all the other fabulous things that are going on our Patreon, you could also subscribe via Apple Podcasts, which will get you access to the bonus episodes that we record. None of the other juicy boko we've mentioned, but we're just giving you another way to support the pod.
Yeah, I think we can say that for the full super summer upper experience, Patreon is the ticket. But if you listen in Apple Podcasts and are mainly interested in the bonus episodes and want to keep things simple, subscribing in the Apple app is a great way of supporting the pod. But whether you subscribe in the Apple app or subscribe at Patreon/Let Me Sum Up, you'll get a treat in your feeds, which is some extracts, some highlights from the aforementioned EC National Awards, where you, dear listener, can decide for yourself just how many of those LMSU virgins Frankie is likely to have won over. But speaking of which, I should introduce a man who, while co-hosting the aforementioned Energy Efficiency Council's annual gala dinner with Frankie and I a couple of weeks ago, took it upon himself to say some very unkind things about my sartorial choices. Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
Hello, Luke. And I see you're not dressing up for this recording session either.
Wow.
I'm wearing a fabulous star-spangled blanket.
Star-spangled blanket. Well, yes, I mean, the thing that confused me about your critique of my sartorial choices was your main issue was that I'd been wearing the same suit for an entire day. You, Tennant, had also been wearing the same suit for an entire day, and the only thing that you did to make any sort of effort was to put on a tie. And I'm not sure that gives you the moral high ground.
My critique was not the continuity of the suit. It was definitely centred on the lack of a tie or any other effort to zhuzh up your appearance for efficiency's night of nights. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that me, and to a much greater extent, Frankie, in a simply extraordinary, shiny, sequin-covered garment of amazing glory, were able to lift the tone to the point where I think people went away, even if a bit baffled, very pleased to have witnessed such magnificence.
Okay. On this week's show, we consider whether Australia's new gas strategy is indeed a strategy or if some other noun would be more appropriate. But first, last week, AEMO released a midstream update to the Electricity Statement of Opportunities, which sounded the alarm on potential near-term reliability challenges in the national electricity market. These issues arose from potential delays in the construction and commissioning of new clean energy infrastructure. However, shortly afterwards, these concerns were at least partially assuaged when the New South Wales government announced it had entered into a long-expected deal with Origin Energy to keep the Eraring power station operating for a couple more years. So, Tennant, is this the state government caving into big coal, or a sensible measure to keep the New South Wales economy online while we continue to build out all that renewable energy infrastructure?
Well, it was long expected. It was basically necessary by this point. I know that there were some people out there doing reports and advocacy to try to prevent this decision or to minimise it, push it away as far as possible. But the facts were that a lot of the stuff that was envisaged, particularly in the New South Wales electricity infrastructure roadmap, to allow and prepare for the retirement of Eraring and the other stations that are going to go, is just not as far along as was intended. The Origin gave their announcement in early 2022 for 3.5 years' notice, as required by law, that they were considering closing it in 2025. And here we are in 2024. We are still racing to get stuff built, but, you know, the race has been proceeding more at kiddie pool pace than at Olympic 400 metres freestyle pace. It's going pretty slowly. So I think the deal was not something that anybody ought to be particularly happy about, but given that it was necessary, I would rather that it was done than that we just crossed our fingers from 2025 to 2028, because the chances were things weren't going to work out well. The question is, are we going to waste the opportunity to get the wheels turning faster, or are we actually going to approve the various transmission projects that need it, complete the one mega transmission project that is underway and going slowly, and build all the generation and transmission and storage capacity and gas peakers. We'll save that one maybe for the next segment, that are needed to enable that retirement to take place. I guess I should say something about what's actually in the deal, though. Having said, it's okay. So Eraring has to endeavour to supply 6 terawatt hours of electricity in 2025, 26 and 26-27. And given its capacity of 2.9 gigawatts, that translates to about a 23% capacity factor. That is a touch less than a quarter of its theoretical capacity will be called on average under the deal. So that is very much not New South Wales saying, Origin, run it hard, run it all the time. We need maximum coal. That is, they want enough output to keep the thing in the game and available for times when lots of its output may be needed, but not to subsidise excessive emissions. In return for keeping it available, the government will cover up to 80% of any losses that Origin makes on running it for those years. And if somehow, and it would be pretty surprising, Origin makes a profit on it, they'll pay 20% of that profit to the New South Wales government. And there's tops and there's maximums on how much money can change hands both ways. In the worst case, New South Wales will pay out a total of $450 million to Origin, which is a lot. And, you'd rather that could be spent on something better or not have to be borrowed. But it is what it is. The question is, at the end of those 2 years, then what's going to happen? Origin doesn't have to close it until April 2029, and I guess they'll sniff the wind, so to speak, and see if there's any commercial attractiveness to keeping it open the extra 2 years.
So I wondered, given, this happened this week, the ESU, cousin to GSU, came out.
Well, the update.
Yes, the update to the 2023 electricity statement of opportunities, and it forecast, reliability issues coming in the next couple of years. You'd have to think that this now changes that assessment and that we wouldn't have that cause for concern in the near term. But I did wonder what keeping Eraring going these next few years does for the economics of other coal gens in the market. I mean, like the economics aren't looking good already. This one's got a special deal backing its ongoing operation. Like, you'd have to think it's bad news for other gens there, but it's not like they can rapidly shut down either.
Yeah.
Because they've got to give the 3-year notice and everything like that. So I was kind of keen on a bit of an assessment from both of you on what this means for the other big generators.
Well, there's people expressing concerns about exactly that issue, Frankie, but also the implications for, confidence in renewable energy investment. Everybody's kind of cranky about this for a range of different reasons. One thing I would say in praise of New South Wales is they're being very transparent about, how this deal is structured, which, there's been a couple of these deals that have been put in place in Victoria for Yallourn and Loy Yang A, and they're not very transparent. There's not a lot of clarity about exactly what the arrangement is between the Victorian government and those generators. So one of the things that the New South Wales government is saying, yes, we're doing this, but we're being open and transparent, and to the degree that this has implications for the market, everybody kind of knows what new incentive structures are being put in place for Eraring. And can kind of draw some conclusions about, how it might participate in the market. But more broadly, these sorts of contracts seem like Exhibit A in what the Grattan report was talking about that we covered in the last episode.
The muddle through era.
Muddle through, right? This period of coal closures and state governments attempting to gain a modicum of control over the exact timing of coal exits and making sure that, as things are exiting, the capacity is there ready to take up the slack. So given that, this is another example in another state of these sorts of arrangements being put in place, the question I had was, well, are we going to see more of these? And are these sorts of ad hoc agreements that get put in place relatively late in the game the best way of managing these sorts of issues? If there's a bunch more of them, one could make the argument that one wants a much more transparent and robust framework.
Yeah. We're probably not going to get one, though. There have been efforts. There have been lots of suggestions for more transparent frameworks, and it may be a bit glib to say, and everybody hated them, but certainly there wasn't enough enthusiasm from a critical mass of stakeholders and policymakers about any one of those. I think technically New South Wales is still working on a transparent coal closure framework, and they can, I don't know, write themselves a strongly worded letter about having violated that approach. But they have been more transparent. The contract that Victoria's got with Yallourn, like that contract could say, and if Yallourn closes early, Energy Australia has to give Lily D'Ambrosio 3,500 tonnes of brown M&Ms, and we wouldn't know it. It could say anything, and New South Wales is, they've published a little summary, and they're going to give us the whole agreement next month, I think. So that's nice.
But is the money allocated to that deal? That would need to appear in budget statements at some point, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. The
Victorian one.
Well, the Victorian one, I have a feeling, will just be in the hazy land of contingent liabilities and numbers not for publication. Decisions taken but not yet announced also could have some of it. I think if they don't want to say it, they're not gonna until such time as something actually is paid out.
Yeah.
But if after 2 years, we remain behind on a lot of things, we're going to be having arguments of the same sort about Yallourn, probably. And Yallourn's very old. Eraring broke down and was unexpectedly unavailable for a very tumultuous period earlier in May 2024, and prices went berserk, and it sort of highlighted everybody's worst fears, I think, including that you could pay this thing to be around and it might not be around. There are terms in the contract about that.
Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? But it does highlight this is the time that we're living in, paying money to clunky old generators to keep going. There's no guarantee that they're not going to have their own reliability issues over the next couple of years.
And indeed, as I understand it, one of the critiques of this, the details that we know about this contract, is that 6 terawatt hours a year is aggregate generation. And there's no reference to aligning generation with the daily or seasonal peaks that are likely to arise and be the points in the cycle where there are real issues. So, there's other incentives in the system for a generator to be generating at times when prices are high and so forth, but they are relying on those other incentives to kick in to align generation with system and market needs.
Yeah. So I guess we will see if New South Wales, as some rush to say, has got done over in this deal. There have been some deals in the past where they did not, as it turned out, get the best result, like when they sold Vales Point for $1 million. And it was commercially valued within a year or two at hundreds of millions of dollars in value for the lucky purchaser. But they seem to have taken their time and really sweated the details on this one.
Shall we chat about a report?
I reckon so.
Eager to get to our fabulous new future gas strategy.
A couple of weeks ago, the Australian government released its future gas strategy, a document that set itself a big task, defining the role of fossil gas in Australia's transition to a net zero economy. The strategy makes the incontrovertible case that in 2024, gas plays a critical role in Australia's economy. More contestable is its argument that fossil gas will continue to have a big role to 2050, and its view that it has a future well beyond 2050 is downright controversial, at least in some quarters. Produced by the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, this strategy is underpinned by a 100-page analytical report and features 6 policy principles that the government says should guide our approach to gas policy in Australia. Frankie, the need for a clear framework for dealing with the decarbonisation of gas use is a recurring theme on this podcast. Does the future gas strategy give us the scaffolding we desperately need?
No.
All right. Good chat.
Good chat.
Might be a scaffold to hang a noose from, but who's going to put their neck through it?
Yeah. This is a very strange report. I think there was reference to calling this a strategy or a policy earlier. I think that's probably a kinder assessment than I would give it. It's just deeply strange on a few levels. So, the document, as you say, like it purports to be a plan for gas production and consumption in Australia over the longer term, out to 2050 and beyond. It explains these principles that the government will use to guide policy making about gas on the transition to net zero. But the vibe of it is really reinforcing the role for continued use of gas. It looks at a range of scenarios, several of which are not consistent with us meeting our net zero objectives, and sort of uses some of those scenarios to justify some of the language it's using around, the need for more gas production, more of everything. But, in a very contradictory manner, also acknowledges that there will be a shrinking role for gas into the future, and demand, will reduce, but it's very hard to see how that's going to happen. And it doesn't have many ideas about how to support that in any sort of policy sense. Is this a strategic document? I would argue very strongly, no, it is not. It feels very much like something that's been written in isolation from a lot of other policy work that's going on that can and will have an impact on the role of gas into the future. It does call out the 6 sectoral plans that are in development and basically farms off responsibility for decline in gas consumption in a policy sense to those documents. So if you were reading this in isolation, I think you could be very confused about what this is actually trying to say about the policy environment that's going to support a declining use of gas in Australia. I do think, though, that it is very intentionally trying to make some strong signals for particular audiences. One is, and if anyone has had a look at this document or read a single page of it, you won't be able to miss the very strong messages that Australia will continue to remain a strong trading partner, and we will be relied on to provide gas exports to those countries that we contract with. It continues to reinforce that gas is needed and will be around to 2050 and beyond. But there's just, there's a lot of complexity this report doesn't really grapple with. And I think honestly that's certainly what I was looking for, some actual quantitative plan for either resolving the shortfalls that we, can see in documents like the GSU in the short term that will have reliability impacts, or how we're going to grapple with future supply and demand in the context of our climate commitments. It's just, very silent on a few things you would expect it to have something to say. So I'll read out the 6 principles and see what you make of them. The first one is Australia's committed to supporting global emissions reductions to reduce the impacts of climate change and will reach net zero by 2050. Hard to argue with that. 2, gas must remain affordable for Australian users throughout the transition to net zero. 3, new sources of gas supply are needed to meet demand during the economy-wide transition. 4, reliable gas supply will gradually and inevitably support a shift towards higher value and non-substitutable gas uses, households will continue to have a choice over how their energy needs are met. 5, gas and electricity markets. I'm really bristling at that one, so I'm sure we'll get back to it. 5, gas and electricity markets must adapt to remain fit for purpose throughout the energy transformation. And 6, Australia is and will remain a reliable trading partner for energy, including liquefied natural gas, LNG, and low-emission gases.
Yeah.
So those are the principles. And, I know I did say it was either lied on or almost absent in its policy thinking, but there are, I think, 6 or immediate actions arising from those principles. I'm sure we could get into that a little later. But at a high level, you can't argue with the principles. Well, I certainly can, but they're not awful as a starting point.
Yeah, they are okay. I think a bunch of people will want to argue with the new sources of gas supply are needed to meet demand during the economy-wide transition bit.
Yep.
But I think they do a reasonable job of arguing, and you could do a better job of arguing, that supply is coming off so fast that it is absolutely, with the best will in the world, hard to get demand to drop as fast as that. And so a minimalist, like some supply somewhere or some supply side infrastructure of some sort, even gas storage for the increasing peakiness of gas powered generation use is needed. But then, 4 is meant to be but we're going to have to reduce gas demand part. It's become very convoluted in its phrasing in the course of trying to navigate a lot of extreme political sensitivities, because the gas industry doesn't particularly like to be told that at least large chunks of their market are going to go away. And the government is clearly very worried that people are going to get into "you'll pry my gas cooktop from my cold dead fingers" mode, and is bending over backwards to say nobody's going to be forced to do anything, and maybe other things will make more sense in some places at some times, perhaps. And it's very mealy-mouthed. And the whole thing really is very mealy-mouthed. Even if you were worried this was some people will look at this and have been saying, this is just the latest manifestation of the gas-fired recovery. This is the same thing. And, well, I mean, there's one sense in which they both share some DNA, which is that neither of them contains anything whatsoever that will actually do anything. Even for nefarious purposes, the gas-fired recovery achieved nothing. And this has, very small bore actions. It has nothing on the gas demand transition front, because that's for the sector plans, which better be pretty bloody good. If anybody's listening to this from the Australian government, no pressure.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of half-baked policy that's, the note from home is saying, don't worry, our homework is due when the sectoral decarbonisation plans turn up.
That's right. So better hope they don't run out of gas for the oven that's doing that baking.
I think the other thing that people who are saying, don't worry about this strategy, as you say, Janet, there's not really much in the way of actions in it or strategic thinking. So don't worry about it. The other thing you could say is there's no money attached to this as well. There are $0 on the table, which, some people are very quick to point at. I think the mixed messages a document like this puts out into the market to industry observers who are, looking to government for clarity and guidance for the long term. that this is really muddying the waters in several key areas, which I know we'll get into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whether you're a household customer or a business customer, this is a big neon sign from the Australian government saying, don't stress about it. Gas is here to stay. It is perfectly fine to buy another gas heater or upgrade that boiler. That is effectively what this does. When there's a lot of noise in this space and a lot of need for really clear communication and evidence-based information, having this out in the market is incredibly unhelpful. Speaking of evidence, from the opening salvo of this report says it is vital for the whole community that discussion of gas and gas policy moves beyond unthoughtful slogan and centres on evidence-based principle. Now this is clearly a dig at the environmental movement, right? But concerns over the implications of opening up new gas fields are not just the ravings of rabid lefties. So if you look at IPCC assessment reports, the results of the analysis that underpins the first global stocktake under the UNFCCC, and even those pinko degrowthers at the International Energy Agency.
Bless their hemp socks.
They've said very clearly that opening up new oil, gas or coal fields is incompatible with the energy sector heading net zero by 2050. So in light of all that, releasing a report that calls for a debate based on the evidence, which then proceeds to argue for the expansion of gas fields and infrastructure to achieve net zero, that's quite a bit of chutzpah.
Yes. And if we looked at the first principle, which is really around saying that we're committed to, to achieving those targets and net zero by 2050, it sort of says at the high level, yes, the sector has to reduce its emissions, but it doesn't really have much in the way of ideas beyond, calling out the single project, the Gorgon project that's doing carbon capture and storage, which it hasn't done a lot. And if that's the only thing that can be pointed to, well, the only way this sector is going to reduce its emissions to have a hope of being in line with one of the net zero scenarios that are modelled is a drastic reduction in the use of gas. And it just refuses to really engage in how and where that will happen across the economy.
There's a little bit of discussion of that, but Frankie, you've got to understand it's all a bit hard. Electrifying homes. It's bloody hard. The technology's there, but there are so many of them. Do you know there's millions of homes in this country, Frankie? You'd need to do a lot every day to get anywhere near that. There's some technology in industry that we'd have to change how we do things. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody likes change, Frankie. And then, renewables are great, but think about, we need so much gas to firm up those pesky, unreliable renewables. Gas. Gassy McGasface. Gas. All pathways lead to gas.
Literally.
It is a piece of work from the fundamentally the upstream supply people in the energy bit of, or the resources bit of the industry department. And they have signposts and references to things that are somebody else's department. And they leave all that stuff for those other people.
Yes.
I think in 2024 it's not really good enough to put a strategy out here that's, got 1,000 signposts pointing to other policy documents that are yet unwritten and unpublished and expect those things to not be contradictory to this and be working in concert. I just can't reiterate how damaging messaging like this is to proponents that have to make investments for the long term out there. And this seems to be a document signalling to, a couple of key audiences, the gas production industry and our, foreign export partners would be the primary audiences for this document.
Well, it is so. It has within it a number of acknowledgements of very major change either on the way or being needed. It has a couple of charts that look at what the world energy pathways explored by the International Energy Agency mean for gas demand, and then what they would mean for Australian gas exports. And they're pretty bracing charts. Dear listener, go to figure 14, especially, which looks at what Australia's gas exports would be under the IEA scenarios for currently stated policies, the announced goals that countries have got, and then the net zero scenario where countries raise both their goals and they're implementing policies to the point needed to achieve 1.5 degrees, which is a very challenging pathway to implement, but is still in the realm of the possible. And Australian gas exports absolutely plunge. The language about to 2050 and beyond sounds like a Buzz Lightyear triumphant plan, and it's really very look. If you zoom in on the chart at beyond 2050, then there would be like barely visible a bit of demand there, but it's not long for this world. Not dead yet might be the better translation of 2050 and beyond, but like badly wounded for gas production and gas industry. They go to such a length to try to avoid saying just how huge that decline would have to be for the world to hit its goals. I think because they're afraid of being held responsible for what is actually a set of decisions that would be made offshore.
It sort of also conflates this idea that, we have responsibilities to fill in terms of currently contracted gas versus the idea that we need to be opening up new gas fields in order to support other economies to transition. And it kind of makes these really broad statements like, we cannot turn off Australia's gas without significant adverse impacts on Australians in our region. I don't know anyone in the mainstream debate that is talking about, quote unquote, turning off Australia's gas. The point here is to have a clear sense of the goal and work towards it. And if the goal is net zero emissions, you're right. They should be sort of working towards that trajectory that is in figure 14, which implies a massive drop in gas export, and you'd see an equivalent drop in gas use across the economy. You would see that shift to higher value applications. And I mean, there are some people that would say there should be no gas use in 2040s and 2050. I'm not one of those people. I think they could be an appropriate role. I think we need to be keeping an open mind about some of that stuff. But if there is residual use, it would be at the margins, right? For very, very high value applications and very clear plans for how that is either abated or offset. But that's not the story that this is telling. Like, you're right, beyond 2050 can be interpreted in a wide variety of ways. There could be a little bit of gas use beyond 2050. It's sounding a lot more cheerleadery. Yeah. That's how it comes across. And I suspect that's how it's landing in the community as well.
Yeah. And there's this ambiguity and bet spreading in the language. I mean, bet spreading can sometimes be a very strategic thing, but this ambiguity between, for instance, the peaking and firming role that low capacity factor gas plants play currently and will be playing more of under anything like the AEMO integrated system plan, and the bulk energy coal to gas switch that would be, is part of the plan for the next 15 years or so in WA, and is much harder to reconcile with really deep emissions reductions. I mean, coal to gas on a scope 1 basis, the generation is much cleaner. There's a lot of issues to manage in the upstream leakage, but like once you've halved the emissions and then that's it. You're not going any deeper than that without CCS, which is very unlikely to happen in the power sector. And there's this lack of curiosity in the strategy about what is it exactly that's going to be going on overseas. Are countries going to be using our gas pretty much for just business as usual, or are they going to be using it for peaking and firming as clean energy grows and grows? It would be very awkward and annoy people, they fear, clearly, to go beyond these highly interpretable generalities and make some choices. And as it turns out, if you don't make some choices, people get annoyed with you anyway.
Indeed. What do you think about this principle too, keeping gas affordable during the net zero transition?
Sounds great. Where's the beef?
Where's the beef? I'll make the obvious point everyone would expect me to make. This section is entirely focused on price. Does not in any way address the volume of gas consumed. Energy efficiency, energy productivity. Fantastic ways of managing exposure to gas prices. Bills are a function of both price and volume. Efficiency guy out.
Yes, and whilst we understandably might be a little hung up on what the principle actually says, which is about gas remaining affordable, the substance of what this report has to say under that is basically that the affordability of gas is contingent on unlocking new sources of supply.
Yes.
And that government needs to do more work to prioritise fast development, reduce delays in supply, coming online. So it is, as you say, Luke, completely silent on the fact that, I don't know, gas could be more affordable if you use less of it.
This chapter, this principle, does talk primarily about threats to affordability in terms of, well, if there wasn't enough gas to meet demand, then prices could go to the moon. It doesn't talk a little bit, but not a lot, about the link to export parity, which the government separately has been trying very hard to break. Like that's what the gas code of conduct and the prior price cap were about. Jury's still out, I think, on whether that link is actually broken or not. But what it doesn't talk a lot about that's, I think, really important for people to understand, and the analytical report that accompanies this makes clearer, gas prices are going to be a lot higher than they used to be. Like they already are a lot higher than they used to be, but the sources of gas that they talk about domestically, whether they be Beetaloo or North Queensland or Central Queensland or Narrabri in New South Wales, they're all costing like $14 to $16 a gigajoule by the time they get to a southern state customer. That's a lot.
Yes, they do make the point that a lot of the cheapest gas, which is, mined and got to people close to where the demand sources are drying up. So the southern states and in Victoria, to your point, Tennant, where the gas is going to come from in the future, more in the northern parts of Australia, it's far from where the highest gas use is. So it's going to cost more to get it to consumers. Our magic gas ships make an appearance in this section because I guess, the point to grapple with there is whether on earth it's worth building pipelines from Queensland down to Victoria or building new LNG import terminals.
It's a very consequential choice.
It is.
And spoiler alert, the choice is not made in this strategy.
No.
Takes us to principle 3.
Finding new sources of gas to meet demand. Again, as you would expect me to say, there is a drive-by reference to reducing demand to manage projected supply-demand imbalances. But that idea is whipped past and in the rear vision mirror quicker than you can say LNG import terminal.
Yeah. And this is where they they have more to say about demand in the next section. Under the next principle.
There's more of a word cloud around demand in the next section.
Yes, that's right.
I think the biggest word would be difficult.
It is really difficult. Is there anything else to say about Principle 3?
So they have a discussion of alternative gases as an option here. I know it just felt weirdly passive, especially for a government that is actually being so active on the hydrogen encouragement front. There was just this very... Well, whether these alternative gases get adopted will depend on how rapidly they become competitive.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I thought that was interesting. So one thing I will say about this is that they weren't sort of uncritically peddling the idea we were going to be pumping hydrogen through gas networks.
Yeah.
That is not a thing that's really pushed along in this. They seem a little bit sceptical of hydrogen generally and more bullish on biomethane actually as something which could play a more significant role in the future, which is interesting, right? And possibly a little bit different than we might have seen even just a couple of years ago from people that are sort of actively engaged in the future of gas. It's kind of there's a fundamental conservatism and inertia in this report, right? And it doesn't just extend to some of the new stuff like electrification and, more ambitious energy efficiency. It goes to some of the actual substitutes being spruiked by the gas industry to take over from fossil gas.
Yeah. There are two big problems for biomethane to deal with. One is that upgrading biogas, which has got a lot of stuff in it, to gas spec injectable into the regular gas network without anybody yelling at you biomethane is like quite an expensive process. And then the second thing is that a lot of the potential feedstock could also be used to make other useful bioproducts like sustainable aviation fuel. And so one of the many tasks that is kicked off to the sector plans is the bun fight over who's going to get to rely on all that feedstock. Because if we're going to make a whole bunch of SAF, that's a bunch of biomethane we're not going to make. And who's more willing to pay for the possession of that feedstock? It's probably bums in seats in airplanes rather than bakeries. But that is a fight to be had in that process, not on the pages of this glorious strategy.
Principle 4, gas use will shift to higher value and non-substitutable uses over time. Frankie Muscovich, the floor is yours. Kill.
Oh boy. I had really, really huge issues with the way this report categorized the use of gas in households and businesses into the future. The report, and there really isn't that much discussion of this in the report. The analytical report does look at projected reduction into gas consumption from buildings, and the analytical report acknowledges that the largest projected reductions in gas demand are in the residential and commercial building sector due to electrification, like big drops between 47% and 71% declines. I think that's over the progressive change, step change and green energy exports scenarios. And then it says, the magnitude of this transition, this is in the analytical report, the East Coast would need to disconnect the equivalent of 143,000 net average households from gas a year for the next 20 years, so just under 400 a day, to meet the reductions assumed in in AEMO's high ambition strategy. And what do you think the heading of the section in the report that's relevant to this says?
It was a trifle triggering.
Why households will need gas into the future.
Why will they need gas into the future, Frankie?
So it makes the case that because, electrification is hard, it's going to be hard to swap over all these appliances. There's so much of it that needs doing. We couldn't possibly have any ideas about how to help guide that transition. Oh no, we're just going to point out the fact that for low-income and vulnerable households and renters, it's even harder for those households to get off of fossil gas.
Will no one think of the vulnerable households, Frankie?
Will no one think of the vulnerable households? So it is for them that we must maintain the use of gas so that those users can be left on the gas distribution grid to pay the fixed network costs over an ever decreasing base of customers. We need to keep the use of gas available because those consumers won't be able to get off of it quickly. That is just appalling. And governments have a responsibility to support vulnerable households to make this transition. But I think it's almost completely silent on the policies that might be put in place to assist and guide that transition away from fossil gas in households and businesses. And it is confusing the point and the need for continued access to gas by highlighting vulnerable consumers. Well, it's just, I'm out of words at this point. It was just very bad. Steam was coming out of my ears when I read this.
I think to Tennant's point earlier, it is reasonable to say that the people writing this report are not experts in decarbonisation of residential buildings. That's a different part of government. You'd think they might have been able to pick up the phone, but there you go. They clearly didn't.
But even, in this strategy clearly state that most households will be electrified and that policy is needed to guide that transition. It only calls out, in terms of strategies that government's looking at, things that have already been announced, in the Household Energy Upgrade Fund that was funded in the budget last year. It does absolutely nothing to signal the need for longer term policy certainty around the declining use of fossil gas.
Indeed. And I wonder how some of the social services groups and the like that are quoted in this section making a point that vulnerable households will find it hard to get off gas, and then this is sort of presented as supporting arguments for how difficult all this is, and apparently we need to keep going with the gas network. That is not the point those groups are making.
No, I think they'll be pretty pissed off.
Right? The point is that vulnerable households, renters and people in social housing need support to get off gas. It is most assuredly not that we need to continue running gas networks in perpetuity because not everyone has the financial capacity to electrify.
No, there are cohorts of civil society groups that have been passionately making the case for a long time now that vulnerable cohorts need to be at the front of the queue when it comes to electrification, that the government needs to support those consumers to get off the gas network. It is, in almost every scenario, cheaper to be running homes on all electric equipment today. And, work is needed by governments to ensure access for those consumers to high efficiency electric equipment. And I think it's pretty shameful that this report didn't call that out more clearly.
But Frankie, of course, there is another group that we hang out with, all the renters and vulnerable households on the gas network, and that is, of course, those that make the choice to stay on gas forever and ever.
You guys are very triggered by this section. And fair enough.
I really hope you're not going to defend it.
No, I was going to say there is some stuff in this section that isn't about households because there's some other bits of gas use.
Yes.
There is. I will just say on this individual choice thing, because this is clearly, a comfortable place for governments to be. It is not just the federal government. There are state governments that use this language as well, that consumers should have choice over, the fuel that they choose to heat their homes and cook their food. I guess the question that I have is, at what point does that individual choice come into conflict with the collective choice to maintain a safe climate? It's probably not in 2025, but is it in 2030? Is it in 2035? At some point between now and 2050, we will need to make a collective decision about the direction we're taking.
Yeah.
And that decision is likely to require the mass phase out of gas appliances, right?
Yeah. Those advocates for low-income and vulnerable households will object to the invoking of, people need a choice, and justifiably, because they'll say, well, there are some cohorts that don't have the resources to act on the choice that they would otherwise make, and that language can be problematic. The second point is, I'm agreeing with you, Luke. I don't think there's a need to be telling people in 2024 that we're coming for your gas stove and you'll be able to continue to use that for some time if you choose to, but not in perpetuity. So I think what government can and should be doing is taking the opportunity in this strategy to call out the thing that all the models that they've looked at in their analytical report is laying bare very clearly, which is that there is a significant decline in the use of fossil gas in households forecast over the longer term. So to provide certainty for that transition, we're going to start signalling to you that gas is not going to be used in households forever. It's very strange to me that they didn't take the opportunity that this strategy provided to signal that longer-term trajectory.
All right, I think we've given this 5 paragraphs in this 60-page report.
It's really
a pretty good
not
kicking.
much. Yep.
So I think that Frankie and I have effectively answered why Australian households will still need gas. Tennant, why will Australian industry and manufacturers still need gas in the future?
Yeah, well, so the strategy reckons that electrification will gradually happen in low temperature process heat applications, and then in high temperature it's very hard, they think. The businesses they've spoken to have said it's very hard, and they're not sure, even though other bits of government are very vigorously, feverishly trying to make hydrogen substitutable and affordable through honking big subsidies. They're not sure when that will be relevant to feedstock users. So they just essentially they adopt a similar view of demand on industry to that in AEMO's scenarios for the electricity and gas markets, which is a problem across the board. They've taken more or less those demand projections, which are weird projections on this front. The bit of AEMO's projections that most people, I think, pay the most attention to, insofar as the great mass of the Australian people are paying any attention to AEMO products at all, sorry, AEMO, is the electricity piece, which is AEMO's bread and butter and is heavily worked over around the integrated system plan. And they've got these scenarios, the step change central scenario now, the progressive change, things don't go as fast scenario, and the green energy exports, things go really fast scenario. And those are said in this report to broadly correlate with the IEA's net zero emissions scenario or its bit slower than that scenario, or it's much slower than that scenario. But that is all only true really with respect to the rate at which coal generation retires and the electricity generation sector transforms. The AEMO scenarios in terms of what's happening in the rest of the economy are not really representative of what would be needed for 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. They have a weird mix on demand for gas of going a bit beyond what current policies would actually deliver, but being well short of what would be needed for emissions goals to be met. And they just can't be taken as, this is what the market operator says is going to happen, because they certainly need more action than today to bring about, but even more action than that is actually required. The industry piece is just very passive. It all seems a bit hard, and we think industry demand will be basically flat, with some bits of it increasing because there may be coal to gas switch in steel making, which is possible, although it has some of the same barriers that hydrogen adoption in steel making has, which is we don't currently know how to do it for most of the iron ore that Australia produces. It requires a bunch of capex, and the fuel is more expensive. The natural gas is a lot more expensive than coking coal, if not as expensive as hydrogen is pre-subsidies. So unsatisfactory.
The principle that we're working our way through here is that gas use will shift to higher value and non-substitutable uses over time.
Gradually and inevitably.
Right. So this is a principle I could theoretically get behind. To the degree that we're using gas, it should be because we absolutely need to and are deriving a lot of value from that use. But I'm not, like the text in this section doesn't really unpack the relative value of those different uses.
Nope.
It's really just a series of shrugging gifs around the need for gas in power generation and sad face emojis around how hard it is to get off gas in industry. So in that industry context, high value and non-substitutable uses would mean, okay, we're going to have an ambitious program to electrify low temperature process heat while we work on harder decarbonisation pathways for high temperature industrial applications, but it doesn't really sort of disaggregate the different pathways in different sectors, which, given the keen interest of this principle in stopping using gas for things that aren't very high value and where there's, perfectly plausible technologies that we can pick up off the shelf and run with, versus retaining gas use for the things that we don't really have a good solution that we can scale right now. I mean, if it actually unpacked those things, I think this would be a lot more credible. The fact that it doesn't, and it's all just sort of broadly chucked in, this is generally hard for different reasons, it doesn't really fly.
Nope. Let's move on.
Adapting the gas and electricity markets.
This was the most bafflingly vacuous piece of this whole paper to me. I could not believe it.
Yeah.
Because they provoke a bunch of important questions along the way about, there's going to be all this change, and there's things that would be uncomfortable for some people to address, all these gas peakers that the electricity system's going to need. Where's the business model for them? This doesn't talk about any of that stuff at all. How are you going to manage the death spiral in the gas distribution network? Zip.
Completely silent on that. And I got a bit excited when at the start of the section it sort of broke down the market into the 3 segments, like upstream, midstream, storage and pipeline network, thinking that there would then be some structured conversation around those different segments. And alas, no. Yep. This document has nothing to say about the implications of all the stuff that came before it, albeit they don't really dive into a lot of detail about the fact that household fossil gas use is going to go off a cliff over time, and what might the implications of that be for the distribution network?
There's nothing.
Well, apparently there aren't any implications if you were going by what's in this report. So it's deeply, deeply strange. to be completely silent on the risk of stranded assets like that.
It finds time to have a talk about like what we would need to put synthetic methane into the network. And like that's not going to happen.
Look, the feedback from various stakeholders is peppered through this report, quoted in various sections and things like that. I just find it hard to believe that the swathes of gas industry proponents that would have provided feedback to this would also have had nothing to say on those points. It looks like an editorial decision to not discuss it at all.
It's got to be a demarcation. Like it's like somebody else's problem.
Yeah, it's very strange.
I do think broadly that there is a view from the federal government that networks are the responsibility of the states and the states need to work it out. I think that is a line that I've heard run.
Yeah.
I think that it is a self-serving and unsustainable line. But
well, they could at least talk about the electricity market. They raised the issue earlier on of, there's going to be this great peakiness to the gas demand from gas peakers and how are we going to handle that? They've got nothing to say about it. Even things that would annoy people like, let's invest in a bunch more gas storage infrastructure, like silence. It can't even follow through on things that would make people uncomfortable. It's empty. Emptier than a gas storage facility in winter of 2028. Ba-dum-ching.
Maybe this report is like an old school photographic negative, and you actually need to reverse it to see where the real issues are. What's not there, Tennant?
You've cracked it. If you pick the first letter out of each paragraph, you'll find hidden messages like "help me, help me."
Yeah. We've made the mistake of not reading this report under UV lights. Seeing all the stuff that's actually there.
All right, let's bring this home. Principle 6, remaining a reliable trading partner for gas and low emissions gases. I hear, Frankie and Tennant, that our regional partners are relying on us to help them transition to net zero emissions and that our LNG exports are a critical component of those plans.
I read that too, approximately 56 times in this report.
Yeah. And look, the political judgment that's in here is the only sustainable path for the government to take is as long as people are buying, we'll be selling. And look, here's a chart that says, they're not going to be buying so much, but happy thoughts. Best foot forward. If the demand goes down, it won't be us doing it, I think is their stance. And people will disagree with the morality of that, but as a practical judgment, I think it's hard to escape for a party of government. But people should really, really, really be looking at figure 14 and going, holy crap, that's a lot of adjusting to do if demand goes down that far over the next couple of decades.
I think you make a good point. We've clearly gone through this with a very wonky view onto what is credible and stacks up and, holds together in terms of a policy narrative. This is clearly also a political document, necessarily so. We're in the shadow of an election in the next 6 or 8 months. And we don't like this strategy very much. The people love it. There's a poll out over the weekend which says the federal government's future gas strategy has been strongly endorsed by Australians, with 2/3 of voters backing the plan to deliver affordable gas to customers in the decades to come. Job done.
Was that the plan?
According to James Massola in the Nine Papers, it was.
Oh, well, I don't know what report the people who answered that survey read, but it sounds like a good one.
Question put to voters. The federal government recently released its future gas strategy, which outlines its plans for gas in Australia for the next few decades. Do you support or oppose the use of gas in Australia's energy mix? And 60% of voters support, 24% are undecided or neutral, and 15% oppose. This report over the weekend is putting a gloss on this whole scenario, which says actually Australians are pretty keen on this broad trajectory to the degree they understand it.
Good on them. There's one thing we haven't covered yet in this strategy, which is the actions, which we've left to the end with far too little time, which is basically what happens in the strategy too.
It's not very substantive.
It's keep doing what we're already doing, and here's some other things that have to be done, but we don't know. Don't have anything to say about that yet. Prevent shortfalls by keeping doing heads of agreement and gas code and the gas security mechanism to block exports in extremis if we absolutely have to, but let's pray we don't. Reduce gas-related emissions by, I don't know, close your eyes and clap your hands. Well, the sector plans will solve it, and that's a different report.
Yeah.
Support households and businesses through the transition to net zero by throwing small amounts of money at them. Empower First Nations people to benefit from the transition to net zero by doing benefit sharing and consulting better. Promote geological carbon capture and sequestration by having a meeting and update the strategy sometime. I mean, this thing needs an update.
Yes. Action 6, update the strategy, my favourite action, because this strategy is in desperate need of an update.
And look, I might have been exaggerating by saying I read Trading Partner 56 times in the report. It was only 48. I just did a word.
Well, they can't say we weren't thinking about them.
Let's try it.
We need to stop. We really need to stop.
We really do. Okay.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. And I understand, Tennant, you are kicking us off with some listener mailbag.
Yes, I was delighted at first and then saddened and chastened to receive vociferous feedback from summer upper Kerry Burke, who gave us the backhanded compliment of saying that last episode on the Grattan electricity reliability report was our first bad take. It had to happen sometime, he said, but it was a bad take of us to broadly endorse that report, and Kerry had a lot of complaints about the Grattan report, including that it wasn't paying enough attention to the things that investors in the electricity sector are actually being made nervous about, that it was pining for a massive oversupply that was highly inefficient and a huge disincentive to invest, and that it was calling for a bunch of solutions that, in Kerry's view, the NEM governance process already does, that ESU already monitors key risks, including of coal unit failures, that there is already formal periodic review of the NEM. He was grumpy about price signal language when what investors want is not signals but cash. Kerry was grumpy. And I welcome the feedback. I welcome being told that all our other opinions ever were right. I think that I'm not entirely convinced that Grattan's recs were as simplistic and naive as Kerry makes them out to be, but I value the dialogue.
Well, indeed. We're rapidly approaching our 50th episode, so I guess one bad take in 50 episodes or so, not too bad. I think we'll take that. So I'm only going off this screenshot of tweets or Blue Sky interactions with Kerry.
Blue Sky posts.
There you go. Is what I take out of this, it's all good. Like, we've got all the mechanisms there we need to manage this transition. Is that the implication? Because he seems to be saying, well, all the issues that Grattan are raising, well, they're already covered in some context or other. I'm not sure if there was further guidance on whether there are things that we need to fix to navigate the next 7, 8, 9 years.
I think Kerry is not happy with the status quo, but I think Grattan are doing it wrong in Kerry's view.
Right.
Kerry, write in and give us more.
Well, tell us what you would do instead.
Yeah.
How would you keep the lights on, to use the hackneyed phrase? All right. Frankie, what have you got?
I'm going to do a shout out for one of many consultations running at the moment. This one is for the latest 3-yearly update to the National Construction Code. So NCC 2025 public comment draft is live and open to comment. And similar to 2019, this cycle, from an energy efficiency perspective, is focused on upgrades to requirements for commercial buildings. So there's some big stuff in this code upgrade, including the proposal for mandatory solar on rooftops of commercial buildings. That's a big deal. In broad terms, this code is seeking to up the ante on what can be done from cost-effective energy efficiency improvements. It's looking at the potential for on-site renewables, and it's, at the end of the day, because of the efficiency requirements that are being put up, it's going to be harder to do gas in new large commercial buildings to get the same, efficiency to provide the heating and cooling requirements of buildings. Despite a previous conversation on this pod, the most efficient way to do that is through heat pumps in 2024. So for going by efficiency metrics, that technology is going to increasingly stack up better from a cost-benefit basis. So, yeah. Anyway, it's an important consultation. It's running until 1 July. So if anyone has an interest in the future of our commercial buildings, I encourage you to have a look and engage with it. Exciting times. Exciting times.
For my one more thing, I am going to note, obviously we had the wonderful Professor Amory Lovins with us for the EC National Conference. We have used this opportunity to reboot my podcast First Fuel, which featured such luminaries as Francesca Muscovich and Tennant Reed in its original run. There's a few sort of nascent embryonic episodes of Let Me Sum Up buried there in the back catalogue. But it's back. It's been away for a year or so. We've been busy doing other things. But the comms team at the EC, very excited. They've got some new show art. We've got a new theme song, and we've got a star in the energy efficiency firmament, Amory Lovins, to kick off the new run. And given its First Fuel, I was kind of keen to talk to him about decarbonisation of end use, but he was very interested in what was happening on the supply side of the energy market in Australia. So if you listen to this episode, you will slowly hear me giving in to Amory and starting to talk about renewables and batteries in South Australia. There's a bit of demand-side content in there, but we talk a lot about learning rates and firming technologies for grid stabilisation, managing Dunkelflaute, and even the role of nuclear in Australia's energy mix.
Hot button content.
Spoiler alert, Amory doesn't think it's a thing. But to find out why, you'll need to go find First Fuel wherever you get your pods, and there will be a link in the show notes.
I endorse that episode as a delightful listen. Luke, you had said that you were incredibly tired, and so was Amory when recording it, but I thought it sounded great.
Came out okay. That is our show for today. We have an email address. Tennant, what is it and what should people do with it?
It's mailbag@letmesumup.net. And whether you are Carrie Burke or somebody else entirely, you should email us with your feedback and paper suggestions.
I like that you were inclusive there.
The two kinds of people.
Indeed. All right. Well, Frankie, if our listeners like what we're doing and want to help us do more of it, where should they go?
They can go to patreon.com/Let Me Sum Up. and sign up to be a super summer opera. And by leveling up, you can access bonus episodes that we record. We choose things that are hot off the press, and we can't wait to chat about them. And most recently, we did a wrap on the federal budget, so that's waiting there for future super summer operas. Go check it out.
The budget special, the annual budget spectacular, always worth checking out. But by the time this episode is posted, there'll be another bit of Boko in everybody's feeds. The highlights from the EC National Awards, such as they are. I'll leave it up to our Super Summer Operas to provide some feedback on the quality of the entertainment. But until then, for Frankie Muskovich and Tanner Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.